What day did the Messiah and his apostles worship on in the New Testament? Was it Saturday or Sunday? Let's find out. Hey, this is Pastor Randy. I'd like to welcome you to Drive-By Teaching, where today we want to focus on the Sabbath, and we want to ask, what day is a Sabbath? Is it Saturday, or as we see today in many churches, Sunday? You know, it's amazing, and here's a truth that's going to blow you away. The truth is, nowhere do we find Sunday as a day of worship mentioned in the New Testament. Nowhere. We don't find it in Matthew, we don't find it in Acts, it's nowhere to be found. But here's what we do find. What we do find is a Sabbath was observed by the apostles and, of course, the Messiah in the New Testament. Matter of fact, and again, this may just shock you, but we actually find evidence of the Apostle Paul worshiping on the Sabbath day. And I'm going to give you two examples today. Number one is Acts 17, verse 2. And here's what Paul says. He says, "And Paul, as his manner was, went in unto them, and 3 days reasoned with them out of the synagogues." Now, the word manner here is really important. It comes from the Greek ethos. And according to Strong's, it means a usage, something, a habit, or a law. And we know for Paul that the seventh-day Sabbath was something he did not just because he wanted to do. This was prescribed by Yahweh's word. So we find that Paul observed the Sabbath. And by the way, it says here 3 Sabbath days. That means 3 consecutive Sabbaths. Paul was in the synagogue worshiping Yahweh on this very special day. Now we also find an example in Acts 18, verse 4. It says there, "And he," and again this is a reference to Paul, "reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks." Now, let me explain why this passage is so important, because many people, they have this notion that Paul was simply in the synagogue to preach to the Jews. Or we see here that both Jews and Greeks or Gentiles were there to listen to Paul in the synagogue on the seventh-day Sabbath. So this debunks this concept that Paul was simply going to the synagogue to worship on Sabbath to persuade the Jews. No, he was going there to, number one, keep the commandment as we find within the Word, but also to persuade, as we see here, both Jews and Greeks or Gentiles. So, and we find many, many examples. Matter of fact, let me share with you another truth you may not know. The word Sabbath in the King James is mentioned 60 times, and I believe the first day of the week or something close to that is mentioned only a handful of times, 8 or 10 times. So overwhelmingly, we find the word Sabbath mentioned throughout the New Testament. And if you don't believe me, pull out your Strongs, go to the word Sabbath, count the instances. You're going to find 60 times in the King James. It really is just an amazing thing. So where did Sunday come from? Or, you know, this came about through multiple facets, but really one man who was mostly responsible was a man named Constantine. Supposedly this was the first Christian emperor within Rome, but you know, the reality is, for anybody who studies this man in his life, they're going to realize that he did not really convert. He acknowledged Christianity, he made Christianity into a legal religion, but according to scholars, he did not convert on his deathbed, and even that's questionable based on much of the evidence I've looked at. But here's an edict he issued in 321 CE, and he, again, really is the one who established Sunday. It says here, "Let all the judges and town people and the occupation of all trades rest on the venerable day of the sun, but let those who are situated in the country freely and at full liberty attend to the business of agriculture." Anyway, he goes on and talks about basically we, the people, during that time had to rest on Sunday. Now, keep in mind that Constantine worshipped Sol Invictus. Sol Invictus was the sun god, and again, Constantine was a worshiper of this deity. And even after he recognized Christianity as a legal entity or a legal religion, did he continued worshiping Sol Invictus. And that's a point that many people don't realize within history. I want to read one more statement. This is from the Council of Laodicea 364 CE, and this is from Canon 29. Now, listen to what it says. Now, this is very much describes how the church viewed the Sabbath. It says, "Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath, but must work on that day, rather honoring the Lord's day. If they can, resting then as Christians, but if any shall be found to be Judaizers, let them be anathema or accursed," is what that means, from Christ. So here we find, based on a church council of Laodicea 364, that basically they're saying that no Christian is permitted, number one, to work on the Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath. Number two, they must worship on the Lord's Day. And I'm not going to go into it, but the Lord's Day actually has nothing to do with Sunday. This day refers to Yahshua's coming, the second coming of our Savior, again, Yahshua the Messiah. So not the Lord's Day, Sabbath. But we see here through this edict or through this council that the church really resented anything, quote, deemed Jewish. And they wanted to get away from anything viewed in this way. And so they issued this edict, again, showing that Christians should not worship on the Sabbath, but on Sunday. Well, I pray that this has been a blessing to you. And again, as believers, I would encourage you to study the Word, to prove all things, because this is our salvation. And some people say it doesn't matter what day we worship on, He knows and He recognizes all things. Listen, that's simply not true. What we find in the Word is Yahweh gives us specific commands, and if we don't do it His way, we're not going to be blessed. So I pray that this has been a blessing to you, and until next time, may Yahweh bless.
This has been Drive-By Teaching with Pastor Randy. Join the conversation and leave us a like and comment below. Subscribe now for all our latest releases. For one of the most extensive religious websites ever, yrm.org. For all the ways to connect with us, see the description below. From all of us here at Drive-By Teaching, don't get stuck in the slow lane of tradition. Put the brakes on ignorance and put your understanding into overdrive.